Now, while the ANC is in coalition talks, the Centre for Development and Enterprise reminds us that the success of any new government will depend on its policies and not necessarily who is in power. The body has identified 5 urgent priority areas that the new government needs to focus on in its first 180 days in office. And Bernstein, who's Executive Director of the CDE, joins us now to discuss those priorities. And thank you for your time and a good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Well,
Good to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Before we get into the nitties of these priority areas, let's just talk about the issues of a government of national unity, maybe your perspective, if you have one, with regards to how they might bode for these priority areas.
Well, let me put it this way. I run a non-party political organization, but I am absolutely convinced that what we need is a government that's committed to the Constitution, to the rule of law, to peaceful political action, and to deepening market-based economic reforms. I'm in favor of people getting together around those principles. Otherwise, there is no other route for South Africa to get out of the terrible trouble we're in.
We certainly are in a bit of a growth rut, and I'm very keen to maybe start looking at those priority areas. The first one is fixing the state. This is an important one, I think. There's lots to fix, but I'm keen to get your thoughts and ideas around it.
So this is our first of 5 priority action areas, and we're saying that this is a big job. So we're choosing 2 catalytic actions. The first is to streamline the presidency, so that it can lead the cabinet more effectively than hitherto. And we're saying that the cabinet is too big and unwieldy. We need to reorganize it along the lines of the priorities we're suggesting, and then the cabinet could drive delivery. So we're saying from the 30 cabinet ministers, it should move to around 19. And we've got to focus very sharply on rebuilding the state, but also on getting growth. And this cabinet needs to be unified in its commitment to growth and job-rich growth at that.
I want to get also then your thoughts on the issue of then driving growth, and we can speak about the development of freeing up markets and competition in a bit here. But what it does also, all of this rely on, is an economic cluster that is coherent. And we know that we've lost 2 members of the economic cluster in Ibrahim Patel as well as Pravin Gordhan there. I'm keen to get your thoughts on that one and how it does play into the fixing and streamlining of cabinet in the state.
Well, I'm not going to be drawn on the details. Next week, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, we're releasing our first action, which is on reorganizing the executive, and then I'd be happy to get into detail. Let me talk about how we free up markets. So we've got a weak state, which has been hollowed out and corrupt. There are still some pockets of excellence, but very few. And in that context, you've got to allow markets and firms, and in some places NGOs, large NGOs, to play bigger roles. So we're saying let the markets, disciplined by competition, play a much greater role. Stop over-regulating, stop holding them back, get a different attitude to the private sector, welcome investors. After all, they've got a lot of other places they could go in order to invest. We've got to make them want to come here. So too many regulations, an approach to empowerment that isn't working and that is undermining our prospects for economic growth.
And then let's talk about building a new approach to mass inclusion. What does that look like?
Well, we feel very strongly that a country with one of the largest unemployment rate in the world, and with some 6 out of 10 people living in poverty, it's time to acknowledge that our approach to dealing with poverty and mass inclusion has failed. And on that basis, we're saying we have to think afresh. We've got to fix the state, which, if it works well, is redistributive to the poor, better schooling, better public transport, a whole range of things. we've got to get growth going, and it needs to be job-rich growth, which will require some legal and other changes to the labor market and various other things. But in addition to that, we are going to come in one of our reports in the next few weeks and months, we're going to come with some very specific proposals. We have to incentivize low skill employment, and we have a number of practical proposals to deal with that. And we're also saying that we believe in entrepreneurship and promoting, I don't know the right word, small black businesses, which hopefully can become bigger businesses, but we should take the billions of rand we spend in the state and to do this, but we never hear any results really that are credible. We should take it out of the state and put it into, say, 2 or 3 funds and operators in the private sector who I think have a better chance of success in this difficult area.
The two other priority areas, and I think they're big ones, ones that we've said we've tried to tackle in the past but haven't quite gotten right here, dealing with the fiscal crisis and, of course, strengthening the rule of law here. And let's get your thoughts on those two.
Well, very quickly, we can't continue to live beyond our means. So the new government has to hold the line. We can't pretend we're a rich country when we're deeply in debt, and repaying our debt is eating away at our finances. So we've got to hold the line. We've got to get growth going, which in time will help us deal with our debt. But in the meanwhile, we need to moderate public sector wages, which on average have been rising too high. We need to look for savings and value for money in the money we spend in the state. I think if we had a more efficient and effective education department, we don't need more money allocated. We just need performance and value for money. And we've got to also look at the state-owned companies, which are an enormous drain on the fiscus, and it's time to restructure the markets, competitive markets in which those state monopolies operate. And then lastly, state procurement involves hundreds of billions of rand every year. We know from the Zondo Commission this is a cesspit of corruption, but also we're not getting value for money. Often the tasks aren't even done and we pay people for that. So procurement, we need to go back to world-class standards here. We need a lot more transparency and we need to think afresh. So that's on the fiscal situation. With respect to the rule of law, it's time to instill fear in criminals, big and small, across the country. And we've chosen some catalytic actions here. The National Prosecuting Authority needs to be a wholly independent institution, and it needs reinvigoration. We need dedicated, excellent professionals who are committed to the task of prosecuting criminals successfully. So we have to look at the NPA. We also need to look at the quality and independence of the judiciary, absolutely vital, and that means some reform to the Judicial Services Commission. So those are some of the 5 areas that and actions we're proposing. We're saying these should be the priorities in the first 180 days of the new government. And I can add one thing that underlies all of this. People matter. You put the wrong people in a senior position, you don't get good results. We need leaders who are committed to reform and who will boldly take South Africa out of a terrible, multiplying set of crises and back on the road to prosperity and roads out of poverty for millions of people who work so hard, who try, but who cannot get out of very poor circumstances.
Well, Anne, it's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for taking us through this so succinctly. That was Anne Bernstein, Executive Director of the CDE. I have your final news and markets update right after this.